Always the best place to start. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Ay 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 ay. Achat sha'aleti et Hashem. Ota avaki. Oyeshiveti bevet Hashem. Kol yemei chayai. Lachvod v'noam Hashem. Ul'hakil behi. I'm gonna go low this morning, and the words are in the chat. I shivti bevet Hashem, kol yemei chayai. Lachzor v'noam Hashem, ul'hakil behichalo. Ay na 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 na. Ay na 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 na. Ay na 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 na. Ay ay na na. Na na ay na 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 na. Ay 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 na na. Ay na na ay na 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 ay na. Ay ay na ay na na. Ay ay na na ay na na na. Ay ay na ay na na. Ay na na ay na na ay na. Ay na na ay na. One and only divine mother.
Maybe light last time, your microphone is like a little bit soft, so just maybe scoot up a little more. Thanks.
One and only divine mother. So we're getting closer and closer. And here in Yerushalayim, the moon is a full moon, shining bright, which means not only are we coming closer and closer to Rosh Hashanah, it also means that the next time we see a full moon, it will be Sukkot. And I pray that we can escort the moon in her journey towards Rosh Hashanah, and that she knows that as she is letting parts of her other side, her dark side, to manifest, that she's on her way to a major celebration. I bless us that we can walk together through this process and join her in the potential of her celebrating together in that one ultimate sukkah that, God willing, we will all sit in, no matter where in the world that we are. So today, tonight, this evening, this morning, I want to start with a teaching of Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. And the great thing about having these three meetings together, these three opportunities of learning together, is we get to learn some of my favorite teachings. And they're all my favorites, but they're my favorite. So these are some of my favorite. And Reb Levi Yitzchak is one of my favorites, period. I don't go anywhere without him in the world. I mean, to the point where actually I don't know if you can see what this looks like, but it's a pocket size Yushat Levi. So if you want to just see like a regular sized book, to give you a sense, is I'm just going to pull something out of my shelf here, right? So you can see the difference in size, right? So, and it looks really, great, because I look at him a lot, but also he's my traveling Reb Levi. It's like he's my traveling Tushat Levi, which means that I even salvaged him from the sewage of Dharamsala like 20 years ago when my bag was stolen. So he goes everywhere with me, both in my heart and my soul and my being. And today I want to think about forgiveness and compassion. I want to think about our learning today as a vehicle for transformation. And I want to say that transformation, a little bit, we saw what that potential can look like. Right? Great is tshuva that brings redemption to the world. Great tshuva brings healing to the world. We saw last week also great is tshuva that that reaches the throne. And this question of how far do we want to go in this process? And sometimes we can't get to forgiveness, but we can get to compassion, for example, beginning this process. We talked about how far and how long it will take to get there. And sometimes it's a lifetime, and that's also true. So when thinking about transformation, there's another question that goes along with it that I feel like always walks with us when we negotiate questions of both forgiveness and compassion. And that's the question of truth and ultimate truth and what really happened and what didn't happen and what kind of recognition do we need for the details of a certain given situation. So I also want to put that in the forefront of our consciousness when thinking about forgiveness and both forgiving and being forgiven, and how do we live with the details of the incident itself, and how do both parties explain to themselves what happened, or explain even how it happened or why it happened or what it meant. I want to hold that, and are we seeking for a sense of restorative justice in some way? What kind of recognition are we looking for? What kind of acknowledgement? And I want us to think about the possibility of forgiveness as a shift in perception. And what is it that we need to do to make that shift in perception at times? And specifically, I brought this teaching of the Kedushat Levi because I think he also asks us a question of, I want to say, accountability. And accountability in terms of who we walk with and how that informs us. Like, who do we answer to? You know, Reb Zalman, Shabbat Shalom, Reb Zalman would say, who's your board? Who's your board of trustees? Right? Who are the people that you answer to? Right? Who are those that keep us honest, straight? You know, our children, our teachers, right? And that's a question of our past or our future as the way that help us align ourselves when we think of Vasita Hayashar Vehatov, that we're commanded to do the Yashar, the straightforward, and Hatov, and the good. They're not always one of the same. But so I want to think about that question of who are those people that demand of us to be our higher selves, and in what way at times, right, both forgiveness and compassion, they call upon us to be our higher self. And sometimes we don't actually want to. We don't want to forgive, right? There's power in not forgiving. Right? To have a hold on someone, and especially if it's someone we're in relationship with and they know that we don't forgive. And that gives us a certain kind of, I want to say, it's not our hand is here, but there's a way in which it kind of clutches their heart. And so I want to say we have 1,000,001 reasons why not to forgive, but we have 1,000,002 reasons why yes to forgive. Right? And that's going to make the difference. And I also want to put that out there. And we have a million and one reasons why not to forgive. Right? There's pain, there's ramifications of actions, of words, of situations. It's not that things didn't happen or things weren't said. It wasn't that the outcome of certain actions didn't fall into place or out of place. They did. So it's really for me. It really is. You know, the Mishnah in the book says, "En dome shone mishnato mea ki shone mishnato mea ve'echad pam." Right? We can't compare someone who repeats their Torah 100 times to one who repeats the Torah 101 times. And I unfortunately don't remember which one of the Rebbes it is. It says, what's the difference between 100 and 101? That one isn't a number, but that one is the one and only. It's the ultimate. There's a difference if you learn 100 times, or you learn 100 times with God in your learning, with God as part of your process. And therefore, I also want to say here with forgiveness, we have 100 reasons why not to forgive. Honestly, we're human beings. But what's going to be that 101? Like whatever we need to bring into the component, into the paradigm, right? Into our conceptual structures in order to be able to forgive, right? So for example, where is God in that? Or like I said, where are our children or where are our students, right? Who is it that we need to see in the eye of our mind that are present to ask of us to be other? So there's a way in which I'd like to think about that question in terms of how far back do we go or how far forward do we need to go? So when we saw last week in the Gemara, this concept of tshuva shemekarevet et hagula, tshuva is so great, or forgiveness is so great that they hasten redemption. That's about looking forward, or magat ad kisei kavod, reach the throne of glory. That's about how far, right? But there's another way as well, and that's to think about like how far back our ancestors, right? Now there's so much conversation about epigenetics and neuroplasticity that we can redeem and we can alter the genetic pool that we came into the world with, right? So that's also a question of like how far back are we carrying our family stories with, and how far back are we carrying our history with, right? I want to say in the native traditions, there is one of the tribes, and I don't remember which one, that I learned this so many years ago, and I walk with it always. When tribes comes into council, the way they make a decision is based on the impact 7 generations forward. 7 generations forward, right? So we have that story of Choni HaMa'aged, right? That Choni who plants a tree and sleeps for 70 years. That's our tradition of looking, but that's one lifetime forward. Because for us, a lifetime is 70 years. But here, we could say 70 years is 2 generations. And we in our tradition have this teaching that if you get to see your great-great-grandchildren 5 generations, it's like your one-way ticket straight into Gan Eden. And here we're talking about 7 generations. So far forward that the chances of our really meriting to see 7 generations, it's almost in our time. I don't want to ever say impossible in God's world, but I want to say almost impossible. Almost impossible to physically see 7 generations forward. And so that's a little bit of how I want to think about it. I want to look into go for a moment into Reb Levi Yitzchak, and then we'll zoom in, we'll zoom out continuously in terms of the text itself. But if there are any comments or thoughts or that someone wants to bring into our conversation to add to our thinking, I'm happy to hear. Yeah, Rabbi Dan.
So I do just want to say, if people are able, if you are not able to turn on your camera just because of what's going on, then totally understand. But if you are able, I can say as a teacher that it's helpful just to see faces of people who are there. And Reb Mimi, what I wanted to say is, when you said that there's power in not forgiving, the person who sort of summons you to your best self is ultimately asking you to give up some of that power. What they're calling you to be is vulnerable. And, there needs to be a lot of trust there, right? For someone to sort of say, hey, I think you should make yourself vulnerable, right? Or I want to encourage you, maybe not should even, but I want to encourage you to think about that. There's got to be a lot of trust in that relationship. And I just want to sort of name, right, that's this vulnerability thing is really hard.
Correct. And I also want to say, though, even within your paradigm, right, it's not only a vulnerability of forgiving, but when you bring into our conversation the person that is evoking within us our higher self, there's in that relationship vulnerability. And because there's a way in which you're asking of me to surrender my power to answer to someone outside of myself in order to bring me, right, to a different kind of surrender. So what I want to say is there's an owning of power. It's a shifting again of what am I receiving and in relationship to who am I vulnerable to. I feel that I need to answer to my students. I feel that I need to answer to my soul children. I'm vulnerable in their eyes. I'm experiencing that vulnerability because I see myself as they see me, or as I aspire for them to see me. I'm already in a relationship. So there's a way in which what I want to say is we have a question always as to, in the presence of who do we want to experience that vulnerability, and what does it really affirm in our lives? So therefore, I'd say those who keep me walking straight, I've already surrendered a piece of that, and that surrender in the highest form of surrender. In a certain way, they have my soul children, my talmidim, my students, my friends, my teachers. They have a hold on who I am, and they have a hold on how I walk in the world at times. Our kids, right? Okay. So let's go into Reb Levi Yitzchak. And as you see, you have in your source sheets, you have the English, and you have the Hebrew. I always underline in the Hebrew a couple of the core phrases, and we'll look at them together. So I wanna jump into the psukim, the verses from Bereshit 18, 17, and 19, 17 through 19. And as you see, God is about to turn over Sodom and Amorah. And God says, shall I hide from Abraham that which I'm doing? And I love Hamechaseh ani me'Avraham. And here in the translation, it's shall I hide, but lechasot is to conceal. And I'd like to look at this pasuk, and I'm thinking to myself, what is it about Abraham that would make God feel accountable to Abraham? Right? That's my question. That's where this question of accountability comes from for me. It's just like, who am I accountable to? Right? Because honestly, that God doesn't say, I'm about to turn over Sodom and Amorah. I'm about to bring destruction. Let me check in with Mimi what she thinks about this. Right? And like we also know, sometimes we know who to turn to for different questions because we know what their answer is going to be. It's always an interesting question. In the rabbinic world, you want a psak halacha, you want to negotiate some halachic element in your life, and there's a way in which well, this rabbi will say this, but this rabbi will say this, and who you go to, and what is your desire there? So like I want to say, like, God's about to turn over Sodom and Amorah, and God says, 1 second, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? I need to tell Abraham. So this question of accountability, like who is God negotiating? And God's, if I could say that, when God is looking in the mirror and saying, this is what I'm planning on doing, who does God answer to? Right? And as I said, the pasuk doesn't say, and God said, I'm going to have this from Mimi. So, like, I think we also, in terms of our own selves, like, who are those people that we need to share a certain element with or a certain challenge with? That was something that we're going through, or again, like I said, that also keeps us walking on. Now, I wanted you to know, it doesn't mean, and Avram goes into negotiations, some of them were turned over. It wasn't that it didn't stop God, but there's a way in which there's a certain kind of check-in, or we talked about a mirroring element, like who are the mirrors in our life? Who are walking in the world as the mirrors? Right? I want to remind you of the mirrors that the women had when we left Mitzrayim, the mirrors that were then used in order for to create the basin that the Kohanim, their hands were washed in, right? So those mirrors that you could see yourself as you're washing your hands, but you could also technically see into the Holy of Holies as it was reflected and manifested in those mirrors. So there's another image of we see ourselves with the mirrors, we see our future with the mirrors, we see the potential of atonement with their mirrors. So shall I hide from Abraham?
So one thing I want to that I feel in that question is God basically made a promise never to destroy the world again through the flood.
Correct.
And God is saying, like, okay, I'm not going to destroy the whole world, but I am going to destroy 2 towns. Have I changed, right? Or is this the same old me? And, just destroying and wrecking everything. And somehow Abraham is the person who can sort of help God negotiate whether God is making, I don't want to say another mistake, but sort of like, have I changed, right? Or am I just repeating the same patterns?
Right. So who is it that we go to? Who is it that knows us well enough to be able to enter into that negotiation with? Right? And it may be that Abraham knows the fact that God wants to tell Abraham doesn't mean that God's not going to do it. But there's a way in which there's a process that we need to walk through. So we have Elul, we have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, we have Hoshana Rabbah. Someone who hurt me with capital H last year, I was waiting for the phone call. I was waiting for the text. I was waiting. And Elul came and nothing happened. And Rosh Hashanah came and nothing happened. And Yom Kippur came and nothing happened. And Sukkot came and nothing happened. It was like noon on Hoshana Rabbah that the WhatsApp message showed up. So I want to say, and there's a whole, I was having with myself a whole conversation the whole time. What was going to happen when that request for forgiveness came? What was going to happen? I want to say for Abraham, I don't necessarily have a sense that Abraham wanted to change God's decision, but needed God, so to speak, go through the process of saying, yes, if they're 50, I won't. Yes, if they're 40, I won't. Yes, if they're 30, I won't. Because every time he says, yes, if they are, I won't, he's also saying, yes, I will. I'm going to. But there's, I want to say, an owning of that action, right? And the difference will be here, intentionality. And I also want to see reaction versus response. Because having to each time say, no, not for 40, not for 30, not for 20, there's a way in which, right, it's not a reaction, it's a response. And while the ultimate action itself looks the same, it's not the same. Not the same. one can decide, like, eat ice cream, eat the cheesecake, eat but be aware of what you're doing and be aware of why you're eating it. So comfort food is comfort food, and comfort food has a role and has a place. And it doesn't mean that every bite we're going to eat is going to be a healthy bite of food. But own the fact that at that moment, yes, this is not for my body, it's not ideal. But honestly, for my soul, it is, which means that in some way also for my body right now as well. Right? Question of accountability, of ownership that I feel that comes into the shift in the action. Mhm. So God says, shall I, like a heart from Abraham, and I also want, and therefore, I also want to say, like, for me, this question is, who, I worked my second year, my national service, my first year was in Spot, my second year was Olean Hospital. And I really, honestly, don't laugh, but I really got along with everyone. And I made an issue to get along with everyone. And I had a friend there who worked there who said, you have no backbone because everyone here fights with someone. And you're the only one who's not fighting with anyone. So I said, it's not that I don't have a backbone. I said, it's just the opposite. I said, honestly, first of all, the truth of the matter is, if a nurse has had a bad morning with her kids and she walks into the ward, I prefer she yells at me than she yells at one of the kids. Like, honestly. And go home at the end of the day. This kid lives there. So it's not that I don't have a backbone that you can walk over me and yell at me at 7:30 in the morning. But lady, okay, get it out on me and we can move on and I'm fine and the kids will be protected. So I just want to, I want to say in that way, but who are the people that know that that's not a question of weakness? You brought in Rabbi Jane, you brought in the word vulnerability, right? Like, who knows that we're not being a wimp or not selling out, and that we're actually, that vulnerability brings within it an element of our inner strength, not our inner weakness. Like, who can interpret that action as strength versus weakness? Like, how close, how intimate are we with that person? Right? Shall I hide from Abraham? Who is it that God knows God? Because Abraham walks with God. So who is it who walks with? Who walks with us? Who walks with us also to remind ourselves of what our strengths are? And where I want to say, sometimes we, in regard to ourselves, think that to forgive is to sell out. That's also true. We have a right, and maybe we have a just right not to. Maybe it's a Stomana Morah moment. We have a right not to. Who reminds us of that possibility? Even so, all the more so for those people. So here's Abraham. And the pasuk says, right? Why am I gonna? Why am I holding? Why am I accountable to Abraham? Because he is going to command his children, right? To the end that he may command his children, to the end that God may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken. In other words, God he has a story here. He has an image of God's self, or he has an image of the world that he wants, or he has an image of the relationship that he wants with Abraham, or Abraham's future. And we have a lot of stories that go into forgiveness and compassion. And I also want to say that we have choices as to what stories we tell, about the other person, and what led to their action. And what story we tell ourselves about what does it mean to forgive, or what does it mean to have compassion? What does it mean to let go? What does it mean to surrender? Right? What do we need? What story do we tell ourselves that we need versus what do we really need? Sometimes, I'll be asked certain questions, and depending on who the person is, sometimes my response is, why are you asking the question? And what do you want to know? And what do you need to know? And those are not necessarily the same, right? And especially when it comes to the big questions, being able to answer what you want to know and what you need to know really hones into what the question really is. So sometimes I want to say, what do we want in order to forgive versus what do we need in order to forgive? Because we may want a lot more than the other person is capable and able of coming through with. So therefore, sometimes I want everything, but what do I need? What do I need to move forward? And I think at times we're a little bit more humble with our needs versus our wants. Okay, so Reb Levi, he asked this question. Thank you very much. We're here with him. What is this to the end? Like, what is this God like? Does God have a purpose? Does God have like, God needs to tell Abraham because he has all these plans for Abraham, and therefore he needs to know. He wants Abraham to know that he hasn't forgotten his plans. Like, what is this accountability question? What is this? Is there a purpose in this? And Rabbi Levi says, like, when this word liman appears twice in these psukim, in these verses, like, what are we saying really? And what does God need? Like, what does God want and what does God need as he's about to turn over, or she's about to turn over Sodom and Amorah? So he wants to tell us that each one of these limans, they teach us something different. And they teach something different actually about Abraham. Like, what does he see in Abraham? As it appears. So I brought in the next sentence because I just love it. When it says, these two to the end, the man, it's not understood. And there are many details in the verse, and we're not going to go into it in length. I have a lot to say. And it's like what I want to say and what I need to say. I want to say a lot. Right? Sermons. What do I want to say and what do I need to say? Right? In a therapy session, what do I want to say and what do I need to say? And sometimes we want to say a lot, but what we need to say is what we actually say at the door, right? That pivotal moment. So Reb Levi is like, and it appears that the issue is the following. The meaning of the issue is that the scripture talks about the righteousness of Abraham. He says, why is this? What is this about? It's not about God needing to check in with Abraham, but it's the way of the Torah telling us how great Abraham is. Abraham is so great that God checks in with him. He's on my board of trustees, as God would say. For indeed, all the deeds that Abraham performed and served God with love and great mindfulness, right? Be'ahava, he served God with love. As ubesechel gadol, with great mindfulness, it all seems small in his eyes and seemed like nothing compared to all the things and miracles that God did for him. Wow, let's talk about shift of perspective here. Avraham Avinu leaves his family, leaves his community, leaves his world, leaves his faith to go on this journey to this land that I'll show you. Abraham steps out, not even knowing, only knowing that he's going with God. Just like Miva Mia Olchim coming out of Mitzrayim, who are we walking with? More important than where are we going, who are we going with? So here, like Abraham Avinu, the Torah wants to speak of God, of Abraham's greatness, and Abraham, there's a humility here, there's a humbleness here. And when I think about this element of greatness and humility simultaneously, right? The metaphor and the paradigm that I so immediately go to is Mother Earth. Right? What distinguishes the reality that we live in outer space is gravity. So Mother Earth, on the one hand, she pulls on us to give us stability, and you can see my wonderful blue goatee from my little fall that I had. Obviously Mother Earth wanted a hug. So I went flying flat on my face last week. So that's why this is like I was quite purple, and it really did look like I had a good teeth. So like I said, Mother Earth wanted a hug. That's how I think about falling at times. But Mother Earth, on the one hand, she holds us straight. On the other hand, we walk all over her. And what does that mean that she allows us to walk all over her? That's what being human is. And that's what being on this planet is. This is the planet that we walk on, the one who gives us the way to stand straight in the world. So this being big and being small. And sometimes it takes a moment of greatness to forgive. I also want to say that it takes a moment of humility, surrender, and simultaneously greatness. And this is the Avraham Avinu element here. On the one hand, the Torah wants to say, Avraham is so great that God needs to answer to Avraham. And on the other hand, Abraham's self-perception is, who am I? Like, you're asking me, you're telling me, who am I? So here, Avraham Avinu, he seemed like whatever he would do would never be enough. And therefore, it seems like nothing. And he says in their heart, even if I fix myself with all kinds of actions and good deeds, what am I? Ma'ani. What am I? Who am I and what am I? Ma'ani. And there's a question, like I want to say, in this forgiveness and compassion element, it demands of us to really, I want to say, to speak of our greatness and also to speak of our smallness. Right? We all have something to ask for forgiveness for. Like, there's an equalizer here. Right? No one comes to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur without someone in their life, unless they're not in the world. And even there sometimes, I think also, right? It can't be. We're in a relationship. We're human beings. And the ones that we love most, those are the ones that we step on their toes, because they're close enough for us to step on their toes. Technically. Will I ever be able to thank my parents for everything they did? Okay, the ones that made sure that I went into therapy for a gazillion years, but also the ones that I'll never be able to thank them enough for all the sleepless nights. No matter what, right? How am I going to negotiate those two pieces? They're both true. They're both true. So therefore, what does Abraham do? God says, like, who, me, God, you're talking to me. God, you gave me Torah. God, me, you're accountable to. Who am I? So how does he overcome this sense of smallness or self-doubt or a loss of power for a moment? He says, if it's not enough that I myself observe the mitzvot with great mindfulness, but included another intention in his thought, what did he do? When he observed the mitzvah, to do it in the name of all of Israel. B'shem kol Yisrael. Meaning to say, really? Who are we a part of? So if I don't forgive, right, who am I shortchanging? Right, what parts of myself am I shortchanging? Now, I want to say something about B'Shem Kol Yisrael. It's a way of taking a step back and asking of us to see a bigger picture. Right? Can we see the person that we are asked to forgive in a different light? To see them as not standing alone, but in the midst of others. Now, I know there's a lot of footwork happening here in order to come to a place of forgiveness and compassion. And I'm going to say it's a choice whether we're going to do the work or not. How far are we going to negotiate to find something in this person that is worthy? Right? This Abraham negotiation of 50, 40, 10, what's that thing? What are those? How can we break down the story? So Abraham Avinu says, me, I'm a small person. Who am I? Right? And I also want to say that forgiveness and compassion, it asks of us to remind ourselves not only as we're granting forgiveness to one person, but we need to ask forgiveness from another person. Like we're all somewhere in this chain of who do we ask and who do we need to ask. So Abraham, he says, I'm not going to stand here alone. I'm going to do it b'shem kol Yisrael. Now, I want you to know that in the Sidurim that are Nusach Sfarad, that are aligned with the Kavanot of the Ari, we say in the book before we start praying, before Baruch Shema, for the unification of the divine masculine, divine feminine, the unification, b'shem kol Yisrael, in the name of all of Israel. And Rabbi Elimelech Elijen says, b'shem kol Yisrael, that's the place where we're all one and transgression doesn't exist. You know, sometimes a group, one person, one kid says something, and then the teacher says, who did this? And everyone is silent because only one person did it, not the collective, not everyone. It wasn't everyone. So one can't punish everyone because not everyone transgressed. Only one person. So if we don't know who that person is, the teacher then can't do anything to the collective. So b'shem kol Yisrael, do we know who, who their tribe is? Do we know what their challenge is? Do we know what challenges they answer to? Right? And then what's their kol Yisrael? In which our story shifts because now they're not alone in this challenge. Right? I want to say you go to any 12-step program and you walk in and there's such a door for self-forgiveness. Because when you're out in the street, you're alone, you're one. When you walk through the door, you're now part of a group. Whether it's shopping, whether it's video games, whatever that group comes together for, there's a way in which our individuality falls to the side because we're a collective. I can now see my challenge differently, and I can experience myself differently. And then my action takes on a different experience. I also want to say, when we're talking about forgiveness and compassion throughout, right, let's not forget ourselves. Right, this Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur process. Right, it's like before we pick up the phone, I just want to call yourself for a minute. Pick up the phone to yourself. You had a hand up.
In a different text, we learn about Anavat Sula, right? Sort of
Yes.
humility, but that's inappropriate humility because you're basically seeing yourself as not part of the collective, right? Everybody else deserves God's love and compassion, but not me, right?
Right.
And by bringing yourself in with the community, you're diminishing your uniqueness, but you're actually lifting yourself up by saying, I'm not unique. I'm deserving of God's love, like everybody else.
So this is a moment because I want to be with you during your davening on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So this is my invitation. I remember one year standing. It was Yom Kippur. I was at Yakar, and all of a sudden I paused for a moment and I looked around, and I looked who was standing in front of me, who was standing to my right, who was standing to my left, and who was standing behind me. And there was a moment I said, Master of the world, Divine Mother, have compassion on me, not because of me, but look who's standing to my right, and look who's standing to my left, and look who's standing in front of me, and look who's standing behind me. In their marriage, grant me a year of blessing. And then I said to myself, but each one of us is standing in front of someone else and is standing beside someone else and is standing, right? So I was that for someone, I was that person also for the people that were in front of me, behind me, to my right and to my left. But they were saying, the way, same way I was saying, grant me a year of blessing because they're to my right and they're to my left. They were saying about me, now to the world, look who's to my right and look who's to my left.
And part of forgiving another, like part of the reason when we don't forgive another person, we demonize them, right? We actually say they don't have something in common with the rest of humanity, right? And so the process of forgiving them is being willing to say, wow, they actually might have something in common with me, and they might have something in common with. There's a great moment, by the way. If you, Mimi, we need to get you to New York to see the musical Wicked, and there's a great moment in the musical Wicked where they're talking about the Wicked Witch of the West, of the West, and she's supposed to be wicked, and one of the lines is, "She had a mother, she had a father, as so many do." Right, and it's sort of like you thought that she was wicked, right? But she actually had a mother and a father.
Yeah.
Right? It's a lot harder to hate somebody when you realize they had a mother or a father.
So I want to say that, but that's the question of how far back are we willing to go, right? Because that's saying they had a mother and a father. It's like saying, oh, they were a baby, right? And we haven't yet, unless it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and they've been screaming for 6 hours. Like babies aren't evil, right? So that's the thing. To say that they have a mother and a father, it means it's saying, wow, they were once a child, right? There's an assumption they were conceived in love. In other words, how far back? I want to say like 7 generations forward, but how far back are we going to go? So this is what I want to say. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is saying. When Abraham Avinu stands and in God's presence in the name of all of Israel, that means that there was a moment when we were all one together in Abraham Avinu's mind. That's what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is asking, right? So why is God accountable to Abraham Avinu? Because Abraham Avinu was the one that held us all together for a moment. That's when we can see ourselves in the other. But in Abraham Avinu's mind, we were all babies together. So therefore, when there's a storm and Amorah about to happen, when we know we're about to turn over heaven and earth, when we know that we're about to lash out, when we know that destruction is coming, it's the thing, be like Abraham Avinu and take a step back. And then you need to take a bigger step back, take a bigger step back, and take a bigger step back. Because we know that when you look at a picture very close, we only see a very small piece of the picture. And the more steps we're willing to take back, the more expansiveness of a consciousness and of a context we're willing to go. Now, we can break, and that's like where that I also want to say, where that question of recognition, of vulnerability, and the whole question of vulnerability that you're bringing in, it can also break us. So I also want to acknowledge that. Right? So how far we can take so many steps back that will be so far from the picture that we won't be able to see it. Right? As an artist, we'll take a step back to work. But if we take a step too far back, then our paintbrush doesn't get close enough to the canvas to make the alterations that we want to make. So Avraham Avinu, that's how far back we go. Avraham Avinu, the one who was part of the covenant, the one who taught us how to walk away from in order to walk towards. Right, that letting go and surrendering in this process of forgiveness and compassion isn't only about walking away, it's also about walking to. And I don't know, sometimes I have a story that I hold on to, and I'm not going to let go of it. But who will I be if I no longer have that story? Who will I be if I no longer have this person that I don't forgive? So much of our own identity comes into it. And I want to say not other people, but ourselves. That I always talk to myself. Like, who will I be if I'm not the, here, a friend of mine, God bless him, a new friend, a year-old friend. And he came to visit. And I was sitting in my rocker. And now there was a period in my life that rocker, I filled the totality of that rocker. Yes, you can add to my body another 80 pounds, and that's where I was. And I have a picture from Rabbi Dan's ordination where I was, 80 pounds larger than I am. And I hold on to that picture as a reminder. But I was sitting there and he said something, and I'm like, I said something, calling myself fat. And he said, but you're not. You're not. And then I said to myself, wow, who am I if I'm not the fat one? Who am I? And if I'm not the fat one, then I can do this, this, and this, which I haven't been doing because I'm the fat one. So I want to say here as well, who will we be if we tell a new story, if we let go, if we surrender, if we forgive? Or I want to say, at least start with an ounce of compassion. Also had a mother and father, also were a baby, also had challenges, also were bullied as a child. Also, right? We were all together in Avraham Avinu's mind. Okay, so that's like that one limon. And the last thing I want to say is that what that also means is, and what Rabbi David says is, that when he did, and you can see this in the last, another good thing, the last paragraph, I have a minute, because technology took a few minutes from us, right? Another good thing that stems from his deeds is that he paved a way for his seed after him, that they will be able to perceive intellectual aspects of the mitzvot and observe them, since they have already observed them once in potential. Wow, they observed them once in potential. I want to remind us, last week, when we talked about this notion of the 7 things that preceded creation, or maybe we didn't, or we should have. Shuvah, preceding creation. We talked about Gan Eden, right? Shema Bekolo, the voice of God in the garden. How far back do we go? What does it look like? Not only so there it was about transgression, that Adam and Eve, they transgressed in the garden. So transgressions go all the way back. But here, if Abraham Avinu, so to speak, was thinking about each and every one of us when he observed the mitzvot, that means that we all at some point in our lives observed those mitzvot.
We all at some point in our lives are what?
Observed those mitzvot.
Okay.
Right? It's like, I want to say, I always laugh when I say that, because I remember once Rabbi Shlomo said to me, you weren't there when I told you. And then, once I shared that with some of my students, and then a couple of weeks later, there was something that they didn't do. And one of them said, well, we weren't there when you told us. I said, yeah, the only difference is when Rabbi Shlomo said to me, you weren't there when I told you, he held me accountable to what he said when I wasn't there. So I want to say here, it's the flip of it. It's like, I already gave tzedakah for you. It's like when Rabbi Shlomo would teach us, like, not only to sign ourselves in the book of life, he would say, don't be stingy, right? Sign all these other people in the book of life. Like the ultimate gift, to doubt yourself and to get up there, so to speak, in this world of beautiful images, of signing ourselves in the book of life, of committing ourselves to living our life. And I'll end with this idea, because this is really this Avraham Avinu moment of like Avraham Avinu holding on to each and every one of us, that's saying, there may be someone who's not going to have the strength to stand in God's presence. I'm going to do it for him. I'm going to pave the way for him, right? So this image of the Chagim come, sometimes people say the holidays come early, they come late. So sometimes it's about, you know what, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur comes and I don't have enough strength inside of me to sign myself in the book of life. And then it's kind of like you find yourself, one second. You know, Hanukkah comes in the Hasidic tradition, we're not signed finally until Hanukkah. And you go, one second. And what's your name? And I go, Feigelson? And they say, 1 second, but your name is here. What do you mean you didn't sign yourself in the book of life? Your name is here. And I go, wait a second. Let me see that. Now, here's the question. When I look, do I recognize the handwriting? Do I recognize who that person was that believed in me in that moment even more than I believed in myself? That they signed me in the book of life when I didn't have the ability or the strength or the conviction or the sense of self to sign myself in the book of life. I want us to hold on to these questions of forgiveness and compassion as a vehicle of transformation. And can we help each other? Who is our Avraham Avinu? Right? We each have an Avraham Avinu, and we each have a Sarah Imenu in our lives. Right? Who are these people that can remind me of parts of myself that I don't always have the strength to hold on to? And that in their mind and in their heart, I was always that person. And if I can come in touch with that part of me that they are holding on to, then coming back to your comment, Rabbi Dan, then I can invite in the vulnerability to shed parts of the story that I need to shed for the sake of the story, but for the sake of myself. Right. Again, the question will always be, right, the forgiveness. Like, what am I giving? Who am I giving? Am I forgiving? Am I giving the other person something? Or am I giving myself something? And that space that opens up within ourselves when we're capable of that shift of story that leads us to compassion, that shift of story that leads us to forgiveness. What are we giving ourselves? Almost, I want to say, in a selfish way. Not in a sanctimonious way, in a selfless way, in a holy way, in the Avraham Avinu way. That, for me today, is the question. And this week, the work that I'm going to walk with is, I'm going to walk with this teaching of Rabbi Levi and ask myself, well, who's my Avraham Avinu? And how far back do I want to go? Do I need to go? Am I willing to go? And what am I going to give myself in this process? How is this forgiveness going to be an act of self-love? How is this forgiveness going to be an act of self-care? And sometimes that's the hardest part of the forgiveness. Is the way it expresses our self-love and our self-care. So I invite you to walk the world this week and look at look for your Avraham Avinus, and then ask yourself, who do you walk in the world as their Avraham Avinu, as their Sarah Imenu? Because that will also demand of us to be in our greatness. And that cycle will then allow us to be in our smallness, and then grow into our greatness time and again. I think I claimed the 6 minutes that were technology claimed in the beginning. You have my email on my source sheet, so you know where to find me. And if you don't close your eyes, we can all meet in Avraham Avinu's mind. And I want to bless us with a week of joy and of health, of strength, of vulnerability, of integrity, of wisdom, and of partnership. And I want to thank your community. I want to thank Rabbi Dan for continuously being my Avraham Avinu.
We will look forward to continuing the journey with you until
Right,
next.
about being my Avraham Avinu, right? Some of us have been walking in this incarnation for quite a while. Some of us have been in previous incarnations together. So I want to invite you, Billy, as the screen is still here and we're all still here, and right, so I have a picture, right, to really look at each other as each other's Avraham Avinu this week. If you took an hour to sit and learn on Sunday, right, it's an Avraham Avinu moment to come back to, no matter what happens this week. When you find yourself slipping this week, take a look at the screen and say, I'm that person who on Sunday sat and learned Torah. I'm that person that went back to Berditchev of the 18th century to be with Reb Levi Yitzchak, who took us back to Avraham Avinu. I'm that person. And thank you for allowing me to be that person.
See you next week for our last session. Thanks, everyone. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Tishni Tov.